Today we're talking about friendship breakups. This was a topic that one of you guys asked for. So as always, if you have topics you want me to cover on this channel, pop those in the comments below. So today I'm going to look at some of the research in this area, which is admittedly pretty lacking, and also just talk about my own qualitative experiences and observations. And honestly, one of my favorite things about the comment section on my videos is I love reading about people's anecdotal experiences. A lot of you guys gave some really touching testimonials on my adult children who went no contact video. And so if you have gone through any friendship breakups of your own and you feel comfortable doing so, I would love to hear in the comments how that went. If you don't know me, hi, I'm Anna Yudin. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology and an author, and let's get started. The first thing you have to realize is that you are not alone in this. It is very common to experience friend breakups. And I know you probably feel very alone and isolated right now by nature of what you've just experienced, but you are not the only one going through this. I myself have had my fair share of friendship breakups for a couple of reasons. One was when I was younger, I had really low self-esteem, and so I was attracting the wrong people, just indiscriminately being friends with whoever. And the second reason is that I wasn't healed as a person. And so I was the common denominator in all those friendship breakups. I was problematic myself in many ways, and I probably wouldn't be friends with the person I used to be today. And I would say this mostly changed by age 21. By age 21, I think I was a pretty good friend, and then also at age 24, I had the very last friend breakup that I've ever had. I was the one who initiated it, but because of the fallout, it was honestly very traumatic for me, and I'm still kind of recovering from the lack of trust that it instilled in me. So I've experienced this, and other people have experienced it too. In one of the studies I looked at, 86% of participants had gone through a friend breakup. Now, caveat here is it was a middle school sample. Like I said, the research in this field is pretty lacking, and we know adolescence is a pretty relationally turbulent time for people. People have a lot of conflict. They're not very interpersonally effective. So it might not be representative of the adult population. However, if 86% of middle schoolers have had a friend breakup, I'm sure by adulthood that number is pretty close to 100%. So remember that you are not alone at all in what you've experienced. And I think the true reason why friendship breakups are so common is that not all friendships are meant to last forever, just like not all romantic relationships are. Interpersonal relationships are extremely complex. I mean, just one person, you have a psyche that's already so complex, you throw another psyche into the mix, and there's bound to be some sort of tension there, some sort of idiosyncrasies or conflict or diverging needs, incompatibilities. Just because a friendship has ended doesn't mean that it's a failure on your part. Doesn't mean that you're a bad person. I mean, sure, if you're burning bridges left and right, it might be worth introspecting. Okay, is there something that I'm doing to contribute to all of these? Like, what's the common thread here? But understand that a relationship ending here and there is not a moral failure on your part. You don't have to carry all this shame with you. It's just the way of life. And here's another thing, you actually might have more friendship breakups than you realize. In a study that looked at emerging adults, meaning college students, it was found that most participants would distance themselves or compartmentalize aspects of the friendship rather than flat out ending the relationship. Straight up friendship breakups are pretty rare, but it's kind of what we think about when we think about friendship breakups. And for that reason, it might have an even more painful note, because a lot of those more turbulent friendship breakups are skewing our vision of what friendship breakups are. And weren't there people that you were friends with in another time in your life that you're not really friends with anymore? Maybe you moved to another place, or they just started to shift in a different direction, or they got a partner and now they don't hang out with their friends as much, or you just didn't stay in touch, or you just didn't have the time. That's a friendship breakup too, by the research definition. So the issue is not that friendships end. I think the issue is that some friendships end in traumatic ways. And then the question becomes, why and how do those friendships end? Why friendships end? One study proposed the following explanation. Slow death, meaning moving in different directions, loss of affection, so for example, having different values, and betrayal. Slow death would be like one of you moves away and gets sober and the other one continues to party, and then you don't really have that much in common anymore. Loss of affection would be like if your friend says something really cruel or reveals a part of themselves that you don't agree with, and you notice those values clashing against each other and you just don't feel as fondly for them. Betrayal Pretty self-explanatory. An example of this would be you find out that your friend's been gossiping about you or sleeping with your boyfriend or whatever else. Another study put it this way: friendships end due to transgressions, conflicts of interest, and support issues. Transgressions meaning one friend violates the other's rights, like, is disrespectful to their friend or something like that. A conflict of interest would be having discordant needs, like one person wants to text 24/7 and the other person is pretty non-responsive. And issues related to support or advice could include someone being condescending when they're giving advice, or being intrusive, or just being unhelpful. I thought this was interesting because I think it reflects that any sort of invalidation in response to a friend seeking support can actually be a reason why that friendship ends. So we need to be really careful about the way that we're responding to friends when they're asking for our help. In the adolescent study that I mentioned, by far the most common reason for friendship breakups was betrayal and conflict. And there was often a lot more than one reason why a friendship ended, and I thought that was important too. Other reasons included lack of social support, lack of companionship, lack of reciprocity, dissimilarity, interference from others, and situational factors. So if you feel like your friend's not really supporting you, if you feel like you don't get their companionship very often, if you feel like it's not reciprocated, like I talk about in the connection course, reciprocity, mutuality is a huge component of healthy relationships. If it's not there, you can't really have a relationship in just one direction. Now, what if you don't know the reason because your friend was the one who initiated the breakup and they didn't tell you? If the other person hasn't told you the reason, that could complicate the grieving process, hypothetically, because you don't have a why. It seems meaningless. You can't make meaning of it. We'll circle back to this in a minute. But how do friendships end? One study found 3 main behaviors: completely ending the relationship, distancing from that person, meaning not talking or seeing each other as frequently, not being as close, or compartmentalizing aspects of the relationship, like deciding, well, okay, I'm not going to bring up this particular aspect of myself with this friend because they've proven they're not trustworthy with this. The most common approaches were to distance and compartmentalize. Direct confrontation was very rare. I thought this was interesting because there's a lot of rhetoric, especially online these days, that if you have a problem with a friend, you have to tell them to their face and you have to be very clear about what it is that upsets you. But this study would suggest, well, actually most people don't do that, for better or for worse. And research also suggests that people who have more options for friends and people who have higher self-esteem are more likely to make that clean cut and a direct confrontation. And this makes sense to me because I think if you are somebody that struggles with self-esteem, you're not going to be as likely to speak up for yourself. You're probably just going to tolerate even bad behavior from a friend. And if you're lonely, if this is like your only option, all your eggs are in one basket, then you're not going to want to be completely isolated either. In the adolescent study that I mentioned, the most common approach was avoidance, just avoiding that person, basically ghosting them until they got the picture. Avoidance was more common in girls over boys. I think this speaks to sort of the gender norms that we have for direct confrontation. It's considered more normal for males to be more direct in their confrontation, whereas females are supposed to be more sugar-coated in their approach. They're supposed to, protect the other person's feelings more. And also girls and women tend to score higher in empathy than men and boys. And so it's possible that they just want to let that person down easy. However, I will say that not all studies supported this gendered tendency, where females are more avoidant of friendship dissolution than males. We don't know exactly. There's some evidence that women tend to be more indirect and some evidence that maybe they're not. Interestingly, this study didn't find that avoidance was associated with worse outcomes for the person receiving the friendship breakup. Meaning, if somebody was just ghosted, they actually turned out better than if somebody directly confronted them about the reason for the friendship ending. Maybe this is due to the age of the sample. Maybe it has more to do with the fact that adolescents don't have very effective communication strategies. Maybe the people that did directly communicate that the friendship's ending did so in insensitive ways, or maybe adolescents aren't capable of really hearing that feedback directly because it's too hurtful. But it's interesting. It definitely stirs up the question of, well, which one is more empathic to do? And the way I see it, there are 3 ways to end a relationship: the slow fade, basically avoidance, level-headed confrontation, and explosion. The slow fade is when you don't completely cut somebody off, but slowly, more and more, you let them know that you're moving in different directions. The level-headed confrontation would be just telling them, hey, when you did this, it hurt my feelings. I don't want to be in this friendship anymore. And an explosion would be if the confrontation doesn't go so well. And I think how a person approaches a friendship breakup is going to depend on a lot of things. Gender, culture, how safe they feel in the relationship, their personality style, and so forth. So do we owe people a direct explanation? Or is it okay to just slow fade them? This is a question that I address in the connection course, and honestly, people get very aggressive about this topic, so I'm gonna keep my answer for the people in that course. Here's what I will say though. You might know the reason why a friendship ended even if that person didn't tell you. Deep down, you might know, or later on in time when you're able to look at your past mistakes in the face, you might realize. I had a friend that slow faded me years ago in college, and at the time I couldn't pinpoint a specific reason. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't that upset about it either because there was a lot of dysfunction in the relationship. It was only until years later that I finally came to a point where I was reflecting on my past relationships and I realized, yo, I was a terrible friend. I don't blame this person whatsoever. And I actually reached out to her and I let her know, hey, like, I'm sorry, I was a bad friend. And she did the same. She said, I'm sure I was a bad friend as well. Thank you. So even if you don't know in the moment and the other person hasn't told you, I think if we're really being honest with ourselves, maybe you do know. Maybe if you really don't have that self-insight or you don't have it yet, maybe other bystanders do. I'm thinking about a different friendship breakup between two different people that I know. The reason why the initiator initiated the friendship breakup is unbeknownst to me. However, I can speculate. I have a feeling what it might be because I know the people involved. And so if this person on the receiving end were to come to me and say, why do you think this person did this? I'd have a little bit of a guess. And even if the reason why a person ended a friendship doesn't feel fair, it might just be the last straw for them. There might have been a lot of incidents leading up to it that were still valid, right? Like if somebody blows up on you over something really minor and it's really clear that in that specific instance, they're the aggravator and they say, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. You could say, okay, well, this person's just crazy. Look at how they're acting in this one specific circumstance. But in the context of, okay, how have you been behaving also up until this point? Sometimes it paints a picture that this was this person's last straw. Let's talk about the effects of friendship breakups. Friendship breakups are losses like any other, and they often involve a process of grief. The stages of grief are denial or shock, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And these are not linear. That was the traditional way of thinking about it. Now we understand that people kind of cycle through them and they go through them in different orders, and it's not just like clean cut. Oh, depression, acceptance. Okay, I've accepted it now. That first stage of denial/shock would be when you just don't understand what's happening. Maybe you don't even recognize that this person actually wants to stop being friends with you. I can think of one friendship that I ended when I was in college where I pretty blatantly told the person, I think we should stay away from each other. And later that night, she was surprised that I didn't want to go out with her. That would be an example of denial. Anger, pretty self-explanatory. Depression, pretty self-explanatory. Bargaining is when you're asking yourself this what if, and also kind of mixed with guilt, like if only I had done this, or if these circumstances had been different, I could have prevented this loss from happening. And acceptance is when not that you love that the loss happened, but you accept that there's nothing you can do about it. Or in this situation, maybe there is something you can do about it, but you've accepted that maybe this is the best for everybody. And like with all grief, the only thing you can really do is just let yourself feel the feelings, let time pass, and come out on the other side. Grief isn't a mental illness. It doesn't have a solution, not that mental illness does. I know it's not what you want to hear, but the only way to get through grief is to just feel your feelings and let time pass. Let yourself work through it. I do think that time heals many things. So the research showed a combination of effects for friendship breakups. Some people had pleasant emotions, some people had painful emotions. Pleasant ones included relief, happiness, as you can imagine. These were more common in the initiators of the breakup. Also painful emotions of guilt, anger, stress, loneliness, rumination, meaning thinking about it over and over again, anxious speculation, particularly when the person doesn't understand why the relationship's over. They keep thinking about it, like, what did I do, and being really anxious about it. The effects were by far less painful for the initiator than for the person receiving the friendship breakup. There was a lot more guilt and stress if the person felt like they caused it somehow, like it was their behavior that was to blame. And there was not as much of a negative impact if the reasons were less personal. So if they perceived that it was due to interference from a third party, or just being dissimilar, or just situational factors. And if there were multiple dissolutions, there were worse depressive symptoms. And causality can't be determined here, but the researchers said that probably it's bidirectional. More depressed people might have more dissolutions, but also more dissolutions make people more depressed, which makes people more prone to dissolutions. So can you come back from a friendship breakup? Should you do a clean break, or should you reunify? My opinion is that you can come back from it sometimes. The question is really, have both people done the work in that time, and have they taken responsibility? Assuming it wasn't a case of abuse where obviously just the abuser needs to take responsibility, the victim does not need to take responsibility for that. The only thing they need to take responsibility for is themselves, their own life. But if it's not a case of abuse, both parties need to take responsibility and do better, basically. That friend that I mentioned earlier who I, reconnected with, I apologized, she apologized to me. It's so clear to me that both of us have really changed as people. And I've had a feeling that this was the case before I even reached out to her because of the types of stuff that she was posting. I just had this feeling that this person has done a complete 180 in their attitude on life. We didn't reinitiate the friendship because it just wouldn't make sense to at this point in time. I don't think either of us would feel the urge to do that. But certainly patching things up is nice. It gives it a certain closure that I think is wonderful. A different friendship breakup that I had was actually a little bit more of a conflict instigated by a third party, by some situational factors. That one was really a friendship breakup caused by a misunderstanding that other people kind of fanned the flames of. And when I reconnected with that friend is currently, to this day, still one of my best friends, and we have such a good relationship, and we've also both grown as people, and so we're better friends to each other than we used to be. But in that case, reunification was absolutely the best move for us. But if both people haven't done the work, then you're just headed right back for a friendship breakup. And one person not doing the work is enough to go back that direction. So I've also seen this be the case that, only one or zero of the two participants don't resolve whatever issues initially caused the friendship breakup, then you'll be back there within the matter of a year. In conclusion, friendship breakups are very common, more common than you think, and they don't always look as explosive as you might think of them. Usually it's caused by a person experiencing some sort of betrayal or conflict or transgression, or they just lose affection because of clashing values, or they have clashing needs, or they just fade apart from each other. The person initiating the breakup usually takes it a lot more easily than the person receiving the breakup. It's unclear whether a direct or indirect approach would be best. It may depend on specific circumstances. What do you think about this? I hope that this video was insightful and that it gave you some validation if you're going through this. Like I said, if you're interested in more of a deep dive on all things relationships, not just romantic relationships, check out the connection course in the description box. I'll see you soon.